Hi, and welcome to today's pre-show to the no the tech guy off the radio. This is the 5 minute time when that light's really bright by the look of that. I'm gonna shut that off. That looks better. This is the time during the show when I just talk to you for a couple of minutes. We make sure that the stream is working before the show and so forth. So if you're just tuning in now, the show hasn't officially started, and my computer is not charging. I just noticed. Speaking of things I should be checking on, my new computer is not charging. Is the plug plugged in? That plug plugged in. Is that plug plugged in? Yeah, that plug plugged in. Is that plug plugged in? Looks like it's plugged in. Nothing's happening. I hate to lose power. It's a brand new laptop. No, it's not getting any power.
Oh, it's probably the plug.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's probably
What you're plugged into.
I'll try a different socket. See, that's why we do these things in the pre part. Find out if something's wrong. So let's try plugging it in on the other side. Take that out. Stick this in here. There we go. Must have been that side of the wife was right. It must have been that side. Yeah, the screen just lit up. Now that I think about it, that's been happening a little bit. I wonder if there's something funky about that stuff. But we'll find out. We'll find out about that later. Well, anyways, we're 3 minutes before the show starts, and we added an extra topic that I wasn't going to talk about, that teacher topic, but I was reviewing my posts to decide on what we were going to talk about, and I reread Pat's post, and it was so good that I had to use it. Well, now I'm going to start throwing some of the posts that we're going to be referencing into chat. So if you want to see what we're going to talk about, it's going in there now. We're going to throw something in by Don Schuber. And now that I still got a minute or two, I'm going to one last pitch on Twitter. So let me put down, actually, this is a tripod. I never use the tripod on this thing. Let me use the tripod. The president's actually having an event in New Hampshire today. I thought about going there and covering it, but the parking would have been a hassle. And it would have been the distance would have been a hassle. The parking would have been a hassle. And there's just no good place to put this tripod. So I'm just going to put this down for a second and type one more time. Okay. Podcast pre-show live now. Fucking black. 49 black lives. Ave Maria versus riots and polls and school in Louisiana, only that's not spelled right. Watch live now here. And we'll put in the link. That's a link to Don Schuber's site, which, while very nice, is not what we're trying to send people to. And that's the wrong page too. Let me find the right page. No, I'm going to need, that's the wrong page, but I'm going to need that wrong page later. So we'll leave that one open. I don't have like two computers in front of me like I did last week. I'm only going with the one today. So let's put the right link. And now let's see if we can grab a few people. Let's see. All right, grab Juliet. Trump. Schuber. Okay, and my wife's watch just clicked 3 o'clock. So we're going to just start it now and be done with it. So it's 3 o'clock, which means that the pre-show is done. So it is time for the Tech Guy Off the Radio live stream podcast. I am your host, Pete the Tech Guy, half fedora, Doctor Who scarf, which was absent last week. We had one person complain that the Doctor Who scarf was absent last week, and we do not want our people to complain about that. So it's back on. Etc. will travel. Although today I did not travel, as I mentioned in the pre-show. There is a Donald Trump rally event later today in New Hampshire. I thought about going there, but decided we're going to do the podcast instead. Plus the parking. I know the area in New Manchester. The parking's horrible. I would have had to go there 10 hours early, and I just, not my day off. I just didn't want to do it. So we are here to discuss several different things. And one programming note I want to mention: next Thursday, between 9 and 10 Eastern Time, I am going to be on Fault Lines Radio, which is broadcast at the Fault Lines Radio site, plus on stations in Kansas City and Washington, talking a little bit about the events of this week, a little bit of the riots, a little bit of the GOP convention. That's Lee Stranahan's son is the host of that. I will be on in the final hour, which is the 9 to 10 o'clock hour. So if you find yourself free next Thursday, swing on down to Fault Lines Radio and give a listen. You won't be able to see me, but you'll be able to hear me. So you're already halfway ahead of where you were. And I'm going to start the show. Instead of going to the first topic, I want to start the show with a special offer for the people. There's 3 people in Twitter online who have made $100 bets with me concerning the election. And we've now had both the Democrat and Republican conventions, and we made the bets a couple of months ago. And I am going to be a sweetheart because that's the kind of guy I am. So if any of you 3 are listening, and I'll repeat this offer in Twitter after the show, I'm going to give you a chance. If you really liked Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, I will give you a chance right now to raise our bet an additional $50. So if you want, the bet can be $150 apiece instead of $100. So if you were convinced that what the media said, that Joe Biden gave the greatest speech in the history of history, and that Donald Trump just created a giant COVID spread event, you can add $50 to our bet. And here's your chance to take another $150 of mine that I really can't afford to lose anyways. Or if after watching the Joe Biden speech that the media told us was the greatest speech that's ever been made in the history of speeches versus the Donald Trump speech, if you decide, you know what, I'm Jim Carrey and this is Liar Liar, and you want to saddle, I will allow you this one-time offer to pay me $50 right now this week and consider our bet settled. So if you think Donald Trump's going to win after these things, I'm going to give you, not only am I going to give you a chance to save $50, but I'm going to save you from the humiliation of the day after the election when you're already feeling down of having to send me your money or be labeled as a welcher. So here's my offer to you, the 3 of you who I've made the bets with. And if you want to just stand pat, that's fine too. I mean, the bets we made are fine, perfectly good bets. You want to stand pat? You can stand pat. You want to increase the bet by 50? You can do it right now. But if you think that the worm has turned and you'd like to get out of that bet, $50 this week, because again, I'm a nice guy, and I can imagine how upset you're going to be the day after the election. And that way you won't be so upset. The bet will already be paid, and you won't say or do something that you might regret later. So there's your special offer that you're going to get. And I'm guaranteeing you a chance to save $50. And guaranteed money is a good topic to begin with, because I want to talk about the NBA and the one-day boycott and the major leagues boycotting and the 1 day off that the major leagues took for some teams, and the day off that the hockey playoffs took. Now, I find this all very funny because you already have a group of people who you have alienated I mean, if you told me a year ago that with the Boston Celtics having won the first round of their playoffs, going into the second, that I would have watched no highlights and no bit of the game or listened to any bit of the games, or you would have told me that the Boston Bruins would be in the second round of the playoffs, and I would have heard no bit of the game or watched any bit of the games, or the Boston Red Sox, as bad as they have been, from what I understand, that I would have listened to no part of the games and watched not even a third of an inning of any of their games. If you had told me that a year ago, I would have said, no, not a chance. But that's been the case. And I'll wager there's an awful lot of other people like that. So you've already got people already a bit upset. You've already got your ratings down. So what are you thinking of doing? You're thinking of boycotting. We're not going to play because we're upset about the shooting in Kenosha. Well, I found that very interesting because you have all of these guys who are beating their breasts, and some people are calling it survivor's guilt because, I got out of there. That could have been me. Well, that could have been you if you had a criminal record and outstanding warrants and so forth. But what I want to get into here is less about that and more about something else. Again, supposedly these people, these very rich people, making 6, 7, and 8 figures, decided that the life of the gentleman shot by police in Kenosha mattered so much that they must not play basketball. Now, I'm going to read you a list of names. Now, I want you to consider this list. There are 49 names. It's going to take a little while. I want to name them all, and I want them on the record. I want these names to be said. Marcus Belton, Calvin Boyd, Crystal Benson, Khalid Bennett, and by the way, I do apologize if I massacre any of these names. Rashad Wright, Lantonio Stewart, Donya Short, Johannes Carr, Andy Wilson, William Bellamy, Antonio Tyson, Thurman Gilliam, Andrew Frazier, Martin Coleman, Ronald Boyd, Antonin Rose, Devon Nelson, Amos Tyre. This one's going to be tough. Oye, Oyele. I'm not sure how that's pronounced. Oil Alputin. I'm sure I massacred that. Trevon McMorris, Tamirin Jordan, LaCassia Gregory, Travis Curry, Charles McPhee, Jeremy Curry, Michael Pittman, Aaron William, Montrell Lee, G. Jones, Courtney William, Keith Richmond, Tristan Mitchell, James Kelly, Markev Mack, Darren Sims, Alan Britton, Quincy Ferguson, Brianna Ferguson, Natisha Thompson, DeMarcus Wiggins, Aaron Brown, Brandy Lorraine Parkham, I should say, Alan Charles Snipes, Antonio Demerick Brown, Austin Edward Belsley, Belial, actually, that might be pronounced, Derek Wilson, Samaj Brunasio Miller, Akeem Jamal Colburn, and Dominic LaDon Gooden. Now, those are 49 names, and I will wager, whether you're listening to this stream live or whether you are watching it later, that you haven't heard of any of those names. I would bet real money that most of you, unless you read my site on a regular basis, have no idea what these names are. Let me tell you what they are. They are the names of black people, young and old, men and women. One of these people here, only a 14-year-old kid. I mean, that's Sem J. Miller, 14 years old. All of them were murdered in the last 30 days. Every single one of them. And they were murdered in one of three cities. They were murdered in Chicago, they were murdered in Baltimore, and they were murdered in LA. So these are only three cities, mind you. These are 49 black names, 49 black lives that were ended all in the last 30 days. Now, how do I know about these? Well, there's a little bit of a program that the newspapers in Chicago, LA, and Baltimore have, which tracks homicides. And I went to each of those sites and I narrowed the parameter to black people, narrowed the parameter to the last 30 days, although in one case I had to narrow it to just August because it didn't allow 30 days. They generate me a list. People who died of homicide, black, last 30 days. Now, the NBA has been playing their playoffs until a couple of days ago. And the NHL has been playing, and Major League Baseball has been playing. And strangely enough, none of those names, none of those murders were important enough for the players on these teams to decide, we might need to boycott. We might need to do something. This is outrageous. We have to stop playing. None of those names are on the lips of any of those players. And in fact, when the NFL, took a look at this, and when you had Ryan Tannehill and the Tennessee Titans decided that the country was forwarded on racist ideas, put out their video, I didn't hear any of those names mentioned. I mean, did you? I mean, maybe I missed it. I could miss things. I'm not Mr. Perfect here. You see my wife nodding from the corner of my eye. Can you see my wife nodding her head? Yeah, that's for sure. But it seems to me that if these people believe that black lives actually matter, then the murders, and remember, these aren't police shootings. These aren't criminals being apprehended or resisting arrest or anything. These are just straight out murders. None of those 49 black lives that ended in the last 30 days were significant enough for the NBA to consider a strike. And I do not seem to understand why this would not be the case. Well, let's be fair, I do understand why. But I would love to hear the NBA and the NFL and Major League Baseball and the National Hockey League explain to me why those 49 black lives did not matter enough for a strike. I mean, I can tell you why. Because none of them are useful politically. None of those black lives none of those murders took place in a way that could help elect Democrats. And what's really interesting is all this stuff of talk about a strike came up because of the LA Lakers and Clippers talking back and forth. The last 8 names I mentioned, were all killed in LA. Yet none of the Lakers or the Clippers had any of those names on the tips of their tongues. None of them were outraged over those killings. And that's their home city where they play. Now, obviously, they're in the bubble now, but they're in the bubble in more ways than one. You see, This is completely to be expected. None of these murders generated national protests. None of them generated riots. None of them generated commentary in the national media. And they certainly weren't important enough to get the attention of an NBA player. Now, I submit and suggest that the reason for that none of these Black Lives mattered, as I said, none of them mattered enough to the group of men who make between 6 and 8 figures to bounce and throw a ball up and down a court, is that none of these black men, women, or children were murdered in circumstances that involved police and thus could not be turned into a virtue signaling platform or attacks on the United States as a racist country or as a political tool to advance their agenda. Now, I want to remind you of DaTechGuy's third law of media outrage that states the mainstream media's elevation and continued classification of any story as nationally newsworthy rather than of only local interest is in direct correlation to said story's current ability to affirm any current Democrat liberal media meme or talking point, particularly on the subject of race and sexuality. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here. Now, if anyone in the Juliet, I noticed tweets that none were killed by a white person. We don't know. I don't know that for a fact. There's some of those people could have been killed by white people. I don't know. The information concerning the murders did not specify the race of the attacker or the race of the killer. So it's possible. I mean, it could be that some of these people were killed by white people. Don't know. But they were all black. And they're all dead now. Men, women, and children. None of them important enough. Now, I would like to challenge the NBA and the NFL and the Major League Baseball and, NHL, NBA, MLB, all of you guys. If you have an alternate explanation as to why those lives didn't matter enough for you to consider missing practices and so forth, feel free to leave them in comments in the podcast or in comments over the blog post, which listed the 49 names, or even in the post that mentioned the podcast itself. Feel free to, if you got an alternate explanation, I'd love to hear it. I'd really love to hear it. If you can give me a reason why. Now, I'm also going to tell you something else. And this is just, and I will freely admit that this is conjecture on my part. I am wagering that there are players on both of those teams, the Tennessee and all those other teams that decided to play games, that don't believe in this BS, that know that it's BS, but they don't want to appear incorrect. Now, if you're a quarterback on an NFL team and you have a bunch of linemen whose job it is to protect you, you don't want them upset at you. You don't want to let a guy through to tackle you and break your leg. Remember Joe Theismann? I mean, yeah, it was an accident, but hey. But you also don't want to lose your customer base. I think these teams are very lucky that they're playing away from fans right now. It's a very good thing that they're playing away from fans because that's going to prepare them for the years that follow. Now, I used to have a comic book store back in the 80s. And one of the first rules I told myself is that comic books are not a vital thing. They're a luxury. I mean, they weren't an expensive luxury, but they're a luxury. So what you have to do is make sure you got to be careful with your customer base because this is something that, they can live without. And the last several months demonstrated to sports fans that they could live without sports. So if you don't want those customers to come back, hey, I haven't watched any Red Sox this year. I haven't watched any, I don't even, when I turn on the sports radio, when I'm going to work or back, if there's a game on, I change the channel. If this game is on all the sports channels, I put on Catholic radio or shut off the radio. Not interested. Not interested. The only sports thing I watched was one throw of Mookie Betts that everyone was describing as one of the greatest throws they ever saw. And they're right, it was a great throw. And I was in a restaurant and saw someone hit a home run in the background screen. Someone on the Red Sox hit a home run against somebody. I didn't see who it was. I just saw the ball go over the fence as I raised my head. That's it. A lot of other people like this now. A lot of other people like this. And, I mean, if that's what you want, remember, there is no intrinsic value to being able to bounce a basketball. There's none. There is no intrinsic value to being able to hit a baseball or catch a baseball or throw a baseball. There's none. There's no intrinsic value to being able to hit a hockey puck into a net or to block a shot. There is no intrinsic value to being able to throw or catch a football. And as you notice, when the sports were all shut down, they weren't considered vital enough to keep open. Grocery markets were. And I'd like to remind NBA players and college players who might be thinking of going along with this that, I work in a warehouse for my night job. And there are, depending on the warehouse and the layout, there are plenty of jobs for tall people who have a good reach to grab stuff off of shelves to send them out in e-commerce. Now, granted, you might be making 6 figures, 7 figures, or 8 figures right now, and those jobs pay in the low 5 figures. But those jobs exist. And if you decide you want to kill the golden goose, you'll be back to those jobs. Once you make a product, I mean, it's like watching Basil Fawlty. If you ever heard of Fawlty Towers, who thought his hotel would be great if it wasn't for the guests. Hey, this is your business. This is what you decide to do. If you're willing to take the hit, God bless you. This is America. You are allowed to do that. May you be happy in your new customer base. But don't try and tell me it's because you think Black Lives Matter, because you don't. Otherwise, some of those 49 lives might have been good enough to cause a boycott. Or maybe even a protest. Now, granted, what you say is a protest and what I say is a protest is something different. I mean, if you're committing arson, if you're burning down businesses, if you're beating people, that's more of a riot to me. There's no such thing as mostly peaceful. Like I've talked about mostly unpoisoned soup, which none of our friends on the left are willing to taste. They wouldn't taste it. And what's interesting is how the message has changed in the last 48 hours, and I'm pivoting here. Because all of a sudden, we seem to be getting an awful lot of Democrats who have suddenly decided that riots are bad. Joe Biden has suddenly decided that riots are bad. Kamala Harris, who earlier said it with glee that these riots are going to continue, have suddenly decided that riots are bad. The mayor of Minneapolis, who wouldn't call out the National Guard before, and now set a curfew and deployed troops and police, have decided that riots are bad. The governor of Oregon has suddenly decided that riots are bad. And I want to pivot here to a couple of pieces. Let's start with this piece from John Sexton at Hot Air. Look, Democrats need to convince voters that they are really against the riots. Now remember, we were told that this was the summer of love. This is the summer of love. There's no riots. This is the summer of love. But anyone who's saying it's a riot is an alarmist. These are protests. Well, here's John Sexton at Hot Air. My headline is the actual subhead of a piece today by Robert Trzcinski. He's basically echoing something that Don Lemon said this week. Quote, the rioting has to stop because it's showing up in the polls. Now, I want to stress something important about this. The rioting to the Democrats and the left. The Democrats and the left don't want the rioting to stop because of people getting killed. They don't want the rioting to stop because policemen were being harmed. They don't want the rioting stopped because businesses were being torched. They don't want the rioting stopped because federal courts were threatened. They want the rioting to stop because it's showing up in the polls. Quote, consider another exchange caught on video. A store owner is shouting out from a shattered window. Are they trying to get Trump reelected? A protester replies, these people don't represent our movement. His rejoinder, I'm sorry, but they're with you. That's the problem in a nutshell. The anarchist and revolutionary wing of the protest movement has run riot, quite literally, among the non-violent protesters with not nearly enough resistance from either elected Democrats or the left-wing media. Consider, for example, the press sugarcoating the dark side of these protests. There is a way they describe the takeover of downtown Seattle as having a festive atmosphere, which Seattle mayor compared to the summer of love, and only later printed stories of residents and business owners intimidated by lawless mobs, or the way CNN characterized the burning of businesses in downtown Kenosha as fiery but mostly peaceful protests. Mostly peaceful protest has become a running joke as an evasive way to describe a violent mob. Is there a big difference between a protest and a mob? Absolutely. I just wish the media would remember this and stop blurring the difference between them. This is precisely the sort of thing that could tip the election back to Trump by making his opponents seem like weak and timid men afraid to confront the violent brutes. In other words, showing them their opponents for who they are. Again, back to the piece. He's absolutely right, and that was a quote from the piece. He's absolutely right that the rioters have been sheltered by the Democratic mayors and media. Why? Trzcinski doesn't say. He doesn't say that every political party attacks a fringe element, which is true. But why are so many mayors and media outlets eager to back or at least downplay the left's fringe when it's rioting in the streets? I think the answer to that question helps explain why Democrats are so nervous right now. Now, I haven't read the next paragraph yet, so I'm just going to tell you what I think. Because remember when the Tea Party was rallying? Remember all the buildings that were burned down and all the people who were hurt and all the stores that were shattered? The reason why you don't is because none of that happened. And the Tea Party cleaned up after themselves and even after counter-protesters. Let's get back to the piece. Here's my answer. Black Lives Matter isn't fringe anymore. It's the biggest source of energy for the Democratic Party at the moment, so they can't afford to alienate BLM. At the same time, BLM's politics remain deeply fringe. Disbanding the police, reparations, identity politics, white fragility. These are not the things that everyone is on board with, but they are inseparable from BLM. And those things are really just scratching the surface of how deeply fringe some of this stuff is. A lot of the proposals are being put forward by the woke arrive in a framework, often unspoken ideas about race, collectivism, individuality, etc. Not going to recapitulate the full argument because it would take up a lot of space, but go back and look at the New York Times piece about the foundations of the anti-racism training. What the author found was beneath it all, that talk about right fragility and systematic oppression was a fairly consistent view of the world among the top trainers in the field that was anti-capitalist, anti-individualism, anti-rationalism, anti-excellence, and even anti-punctuality. If you've read that already, consider looking at James Lindsay's piece on why the woke won't debate. Again, it's not because there's a rule out there against it, because wokeness comes with deep skepticism about all the other cultural structures that have led us to see what they see as a corrupt and failed system of oppression. They don't want to play the liberal game anymore. By liberal, I mean they don't really support things like free speech for everyone. All of this means that in practice, these groups behave differently in the streets because they're coming from a different perspective. When you believe reality is in a state of constant conflict for power among radical groups, you wind up with groups of people telling white strangers to give up their homes to a black person. When you believe the purpose of white people is to be allies to black causes, you end up with a mob of white kids being told by black leaders to move on and confront the one white woman who won't show solidarity by raising her fist. And more to the point of the ongoing riots, you get people who believe that looting is a form of reparations and destruction of property isn't violence, and maybe even that violence is necessary. So to wrap it up, I think the Democrats have a real problem. The problem is that they can't afford to condemn the extremism, which is creating a problem for them at the moment because extremism can't be localized to a group of outsiders. There's no sister soldier to condemn. The extremism is already well inside the tent. It's too late to throw Antifa under the bus after months of people like Don Lemon defending them and media outlets downplaying it. No one will believe it. It's true that mostly peaceful has become a running joke to many as a description for nightly protesters that invariably turn violent. What the phrase conceals is that there are large groups of agitated people in the streets who all share similar ideas and all believe in a diversity of tactics to achieve their shared goals. They've been working together for months, so condemning the riots without offending the wider movement is going to take some effort. And more than that, they know how violent these people are, and they don't want to be associated with it. But now, like I said, people are suddenly changing their tune. I mean, even Eric Erickson has said this today. Friends, I've never written what I'm about to write. I've not written it, thought it, or said it, or tweeted it here, but here we are. If the election were held today, Donald J. Trump would be reelected president of the United States. That can change. It can be sabotaged with one tweet. But, the Democrats, and let me jump ahead here. The Democrats' mistakes are as follows. Democrats made the mistake of thinking America was in their bubble. They think it's the Obama and economic boom, Trump economic collapse, the orange man bad. Most Americans don't care for the president, but they do not see him as the boogeyman. The sustained hate from the media and Democrats against the president have at this point become the boy who cries wolf territory that most Americans have moved on from. Democrats concluded that everyone would agree with their attacks, and if you didn't, you were a white supremacist. Americans have moved on to other things. I'm adding this to the chat room, by the way, so you can check that out later. Democrats blame the president, not the virus, for an economic collapse. Americans remember what their lives were under Obama and under Trump. Prior to the virus, Americans had the lowest unemployment rate they've ever experienced. Democrats attribute that to Obama. But Americans tend to credit the man in the White House at the moment. Saying Trump read the economy also explicitly contradicts the views of Americans who blame the virus. Americans want to vote for someone who will save their 401ks more than they want a nice guy. They don't blame Trump for the economic downturn, and remember, not experiencing that level of economic productivity when Biden was in the White House. Lastly, and most importantly, the Democrats, and I'm skipping number 3, their virus stuff. Last and most importantly, the Democrats have let themselves be held hostage to the radical left. They had a week to address the riots with their convention. They took a pass. They're waiting for the political shift to be forceful against it, and even Biden's response was anemic. In 2016, crime was not a top 15 issue in the Pew research. Now it's the number 5 issue in America, with guns at number 7 and more Americans supporting the president's position or both. And as much as Democrats want to say this is happening in Trump's America, understand that it's Biden supporters in Democrat cities and rioting, burning down businesses. Crime is becoming a central issue of the campaign, and Biden's on the side of the criminals. That statement may sound like hyperbole, but then you're leading towards Biden and don't understand outside your bubble. We're in Willie Horton 2.0's territory, and the Democrats who internalize that as a race issue will lose on it again. I mean, here's another example of what I'm talking about. This is from Allah Pundit, who, as you know, is a big Trump supporter. Tennessee Democrat slams rioters and vandals. Peaceful protest ends peacefully. Anarchy ends in chaos. This speech was given a few weeks ago and picked up a few days ago in writing media. I missed it at the time, but it's breaking big online after what happened in Kenosha. Kenosha. I'm sorry, Valerie. I'm surprised John DeBerry isn't a bigger name politically. Anyone who can uncook a steam winder like this temporarily without missing a beat has serious talent. He was cursed to be born a Democrat in a red state, or rather an ex-Democrat. Turns out the Tennessee Democrat Party kicked him out of the party for have affronted Democrat sensibilities. Now think about that. He went after the riots and got kicked out of the party for it. That's an amazing thing. That's an amazing thing. And now let's go to Don Schuber. The riots have really turned things around by expanding President Trump's base. And remember, Don Schuber has predicted 37 states. He already had Colorado, Minnesota, and New Mexico flipping, but riots in Denver, Minneapolis, and Albuquerque seal the deal. Quote, Jews drinking coffee and watching the Republican convention at Tablet magazine showed the never Trump a point of view. They are worried. Noel Polak wrote, Is Biden blowing it? He cited the riots, writing, "There's a real danger here for Biden because events spiral out of control. People will stop believing that giving them what they want will stop the chaos. The more people understand the chaos as a form of political extortion, the more they see Biden's response is meek and frightened of the mob." Frankly, Biden should be frightened of the mob. Levi Leibovitz wrote, "I walked the second night of the Republican convention the same way you fall in love or go bankrupt, gradually, but then suddenly stricken by a strange and somewhat inexplicable phenomenon. It was this: Donald Trump is going to win in November and win big." Leibovitz wrote, "Last week, the Democrats used their convention to deliver 3 key messages. Joe Biden is a decent person. He's not Donald Trump, who is not a decent person. And being both a decent person and not Trump, Biden is passionate about amplifying the voices of women and minorities, which is one important way to prove your decency and not Trumpness. McGovern promised not to be Nixon. He carried Massachusetts and D.C. Mondale promised not to be Reagan. He carried Minnesota and D.C. That's a very important lesson. I think that things are getting bigger and bigger for the Democrats, in the sense that I've always believed that Trump was ahead. But I also think that the Democrats have an existential problem here. That you might see the Democrats actually lose state legislatures again. And if they start losing state legislatures, they'll lose them just before the census reappropriation of seats and redistricting. If you're going to lose the House and Senate, that is the worst time to do it. Now, again, we have Reuters reporting that Kamala Harris is now condemning looting and violence. And just contrast last night at the Republican convention. You had stirring speeches. You had fireworks. And for me, the moment wasn't the moment that killed it for me wasn't so much the Trump speech. It was watching Ave Maria being sung on the balcony at the White House. Now, if you're Catholic, and I mean Catholic who believes Catholic, that's a stirring thing. And given the history of anti-Catholicism in this country, and if you know history, you know anti-Catholicism in this country, it was an incredible thing. And if you remember, I talked about the Trump prophecy and the guy who put the brick in the Vatican 40 years ago saying Trump was going to save the country. To be aware of that and then see Ave Maria sung at the White House was incredible. I was literally sobbing. I couldn't. You cannot imagine what that meant. And all I could think of was Stonewall Jackson's line, "Hugh does not see God's hand in this is blind, sir, blind." I'm actually of the theory that that Jackson was right. God's hand was to give the Confederates just enough success so that Lincoln would have to emancipate. Then Jackson dies, and they lose. Jackson lives, they might win Gettysburg. But that's inside baseball that I've been thinking of myself for many years. But there's something but it really gets to me that contrasts that to outside the White House, where you actually had people threatening to burn a church. You have people defending Joe Biden's Catholicism while his supporters are threatening to burn a church. While in the White House, Ave Maria is being sung. Does nobody see this contrast here? And speaking of contrasts, let's talk a little bit about Kenosha. There's 2 things about Kenosha that are significant to me that's not getting enough play. The first thing is that when the riots were daily and still are daily in Portland, and when the riots are daily in Seattle, most Americans, they're crazy over there anyways. It's Portland, it's Seattle. What do you expect? a lot of Americans would shake their heads, but they weren't concerned. They weren't bothered by it as much because that's what crazy people are. That's what crazy people are. Who cares what happened to crazy people? Kenosha in Wisconsin, people don't think of it that way. I just added a clip that I didn't get a chance to talk about, but that you should see concerning sports. By the way, I was trying to close a screen or two. People don't think of Kenosha like that. People don't think of Wisconsin like that, even though there's plenty of crazies there in some of the big cities. They just don't. If this can happen to Wisconsin, they think, it can happen where I live. And suddenly, this goes from a story about a bunch of crazies in a crazy left place where it's not safe to, oh my God, this can happen here. And it's just astounding. Astounding, astounding, astounding. And I mean, this isn't playing well. I mean, let me quote Kevin McCarthy, the GOP leader. Hours after Nancy Pelosi labeled Republicans as domestic enemies, leftist mobs harassed, intimidated, and tried to incite violence against Republicans in the streets. Her reckless comments have consequences. She should immediately condemn these assaults against democracy. Well, and there's a great tweet from somebody who calls himself Alfred the Great. Why do you need guns? Asked the mob with a guillotine. They had remember, they had a portable guillotine and did a beheading of Donald Trump and threatened to burn a church while they're singing Ave Maria in the White House at the same, while this is going on. And they're trying to assault senators and other people leaving while this is going on. This is no longer considered confined to. It's not confined. It's people see to themselves, this could happen here. And I remember that feeling when they were going to have their first march in Fitchburg. I was really worried. Businessmen were really worried. But let's talk about one more thing concerning Jacob Blake and Kyle Rittenhouse. And I want to talk about the Rittenhouse Method versus the Jacob Blake Method. Now, Kyle Rittenhouse, as you know, is the young man, 17-year-old, who went armed to Kenosha to help protect buildings, helped even clean off some of the graffiti, and then was attacked and shot some of his attackers, killed 2, wounded 1. Now, Stacey McCain has an interesting piece about one of the people who got himself shot, Joseph Rosenbaum, who was literally, and I don't believe in this N-word stuff. So if you're offended easily, you got 2 seconds, you get 5 seconds to turn this off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sex offender Joseph Rosenbaum taunted armed civilians, shoot me, nigger. This is the words of Joseph Rosenbaum, the late Joseph Rosenbaum, who, according to the sex offender registry in Wisconsin, where he was registered, is 5'3". He's a short guy, 165 pounds, better shape than me, age 36, gender male, race white, ethnicity no data, hair color red or auburn, although it was all shaved off there. And Julio Rojas is tweeting. He was live at the Now it is confirmed that Joseph Rosenbaum was one of the people shot and killed by the alleged gunman. And let's not use alleged there, because he was actually the gunman. Nobody denies that he's the gunman. There's an alleged whether or not it's murder or not, or whether he was criminal. But I mean, he was the gunman. This is not in dispute. I filmed him earlier at the night taunting odd civilians, saying, "Shoot me, nigger." Now, again, they blacked those out, but this is what the person said. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, because that's what they said. Language exists for a reason. Stacey McCain writes about this and asks, think of what kind of white man would be shouting, the N-word during a protest allegedly in support of Black Lives Matter, and you discover that Rosenbaum served more than 10 years in an Arizona prison after being convicted of sexual conduct with a minor. And there's all kinds of things about this. And then Stacey McCain asks what I think is the obvious question. Now, remember, 3 people were shot. What are the odds that a guy opens fire at a mass gathering and all 3 people he shoots turn out to have criminal records? Doesn't that tell you a little bit about who is engaging in these mostly peaceful protests? I think it does. I think it tells it very strongly. And I think that's very, very important. But more important is this than the shooting itself, and the courts will adjudicate whether the shooting was justified. I'm not an attorney. I look at the videos, and that, to me, that's self-defense. But people are thinking 2 different things online. If you go to Twitter and you start to type in Kyle Rittenhouse, 2 auto-population things in addition to his name pop up. He's a terrorist. He's a hero. Totally different worldviews. But the more important question is the biggest difference between these 2 people, Kyle Rittenhouse and Jacob Blake, is this. After Kyle Rittenhouse shot these men, what do you think he did? He went to the police to turn himself in. Now, the police didn't take him right away because they were worried about the people who've been shot, but he later turned himself in. He didn't run away. He didn't try to hide evidence. He didn't try to do anything else. He turned himself in. He surrendered himself to the law. Now, think about this. Granted that in Minneapolis, fentanyl was involved. But you've seen the full George Floyd film now. If George Floyd sits in that police car when the officers tell him to, if he follows the Rittenhouse Method, he's alive today. If Jacob Blake follows the Rittenhouse Method, he's alive today. If any of, now there's a list of people who were shot. Not the list I gave you, but people who've been shot in confrontations with the police, armed or not armed. If you surrender yourself to the police, or if when a police officer tells you, don't move, give yourself up or whatever, if you follow the Kyle Rittenhouse method of dealing with police, you will live to see trial. You are, there's always a chance that you're going to have an actual psycho cop. But 99,999 times out of 100,000, you are going to live to be tried in a U.S. court with a jury and a free lawyer if you need one. You're going to live to get a day in court if you follow the Rittenhouse method. Now, why is nobody talking about this fact? That this kid, and remember, there's a 17-year-old kid without a record before. This kid just turned himself in. No fuss, no muss. Turned himself in. What a difference would it be if these other fellows had done that? What a difference if George Floyd, when those first 2 young officers said, please get in the car. In fact, if he was in the middle of a fentanyl overdose, might have saved his life. Now, I want to make a clarification concerning Mr. Floyd, because I think it's important to make this clarification. If he was overdosing with fentanyl, he might have died anyways. But the chokehold combined with the fentanyl might have had a lot to do with it too. I mean, you saw the videos. It don't look right. So I think there's still probably some culpability there. Just because that's my opinion. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a member of the jury. But if he originally goes with those cops who said, get in the car and doesn't resist, he follows the Rittenhouse way, he's fine. If you obey a lawful order from a police officer and you give up, it's like that scene from remember the scene from the original Naked Gun movie when O.J. Simpson kicks in the door, gets his door stuck, and everyone pulls out their guns, and he comes in, police! And one guy drops his gun and puts up his hands, and everyone else looks at him, and then he picks the gun back up. If you were like that guy who drops the gun and puts up your hands, your odds of getting shot by that police officer are almost nothing. You have a better chance of winning the lottery than you have a chance of being shot by that police officer if you just give up and don't resist arrest. Remember, this isn't 1850. This isn't 1900. This isn't 1930. Ain't gonna, that's just a fact of life. Follow the Rittenhouse method of dealing with police. You can live. You can live to stand trial. Why this is not being discussed, I don't know. Why this is being discussed, I can't see. So, the problem with all of this is that you have narratives, and the narratives are more important to these people than the reality. Let me tell you a secret that the Democrats are only now figuring out. Reality does not care about your narrative. Reality does not care what your narrative is. They do not care. Now remember, again, like I said, the reality is if you're chanting in front of St. John's Church saying, if we don't get justice, burn it down, that ain't going to play well. And it's not like the media has to go. It's not how people have to go to the mainstream media for this stuff. It's very, very strange. It's very, very strange. At least it's strange to me. But again, let me give everybody a piece of advice if you're ever in a situation with police. When given the choice between the Jacob Blake method and the Kyle Rittenhouse method, choose the Kyle Rittenhouse method. And you will live to stand trial, like Rittenhouse is going to. And you are probably going to get you might not get acquitted if you've got outstanding warrants. I think a lot of times you're in situations where people know that they're guilty and about to go to jail, and they figure they got nothing to lose. This is what happens, in my opinion. Could be wrong, but that's my advice there. Now, we've gone a little long, but I want to get to this last topic because I think this last topic is big. And I ran into this and I regret to say I ran into it accidentally because I had skimmed it before. I was skimming through the post for the week to see if there was something I needed to talk about. And I ran into Pat Austin's post. Pat Austin skipped posting the week before last. She was getting ready to go to school. She's a school teacher. Her blog is So It Goes in Shreveport. She's one of my original Magnificent Seven people. She has a book out, by the way. Her book is Cane River, Bohemia, Cammie Henry and Her Circle at Melrose Plantation. So you might want to check that book out. Well, Pat, we have a lot of discussion about schools going back. Now, I've already made my opinion known that I think that schools not going back is not a bad thing because you're getting rid of liberal indoctrination in many places. But I want you to hear this story because this is from an actual teacher teaching actual students in an actual public school in the COVID situation. Schools, this is Pat Austin, this is Shreveport, and this is from Monday. Schools across the country are opening up, some all virtual, some in person, and some hybrid mix A-B schedule. School districts are making decisions about transparency and how much information to share with the public with regard to COVID exposure and outbreaks. These policies differ from district to district. When making decisions about exposure transparency, several factors seem to be at play. First to consider is patient privacy. Of course, some districts are interested in the image and in containing community panic. Others are wide open and making weekly disclosure announcements. In exploring the same topic last week, the New York Times talked with Dr. Ashia Jia of the Harvard Global Institute, who said, quote, if schools don't notify, it can actually make disease control more difficult. And it's not like no one will know. Word will get out through a rumor mill. You don't scare people by telling them what's going on. You scare them by hiding information. That's actually true because I've seen examples of this personally at my work. Personally, I think communities should be informed, but I do see the problem if it's a very small community where patient identity would be obvious. Most districts are choosing to notify only close contacts who might need to quarantine, and the rumor mill is taking care of the rest. This is a poor system. I teach high school, and we had 4 days of in-service and training of the new programs that we will support virtual learning, and then we had students for 2 days so far on an A-B hybrid schedule. We get half of our students on an A day and the other half on the B day. Then they alternate Fridays. This is my 25th year to teach high school, and it's the first year I felt sad at the end of the day. There were no hugs, no high fives, and no smiles that I could see because everyone was wearing a mask. Many people were so anxious for schools to open so we would, quote, get back to normal. But let me tell you, this is no way normal. When the bus drops kids off, they go straight to a homeroom or to the cafeteria to pick up a grab and go breakfast in a big Ziploc bag. Then they go to homeroom. Everyone sits in homeroom till the first bell at 7:25. We are 6 feet apart, and there are no more than 10 kids in a classroom at any one time. Same procedure for lunch. The kids never go outside and can't let loose and relax much at lunch because they were sitting 6 feet apart at a desk. This is not normal. Classes aren't even normal. There are no group projects. We have to sit in straight rows now, all facing front. Some elementary teachers have spent their own money to build plexiglass partitions and cubicles for students to avoid the rows. The halls are quiet because you can't stop and socialize. 6 feet apart. It's just very surreal and dystopian. It made me sad. My colleagues and I are trying hard as we can to find solutions, to break the monotony, to be engaging, to make them laugh, to feel safe, and to feel welcome. But this is not normal school. Still better than 100% virtual for some students, that's certain. There is still bound to be a little bit of social simulation here. But outbreaks and exposures are already happening. I personally know of several in quarantine after only 2 days. I take precautions. I bottle a HEPA air purifier for my classroom out of my own pocket. We wipe down the Chromebooks between each student and desks all day long. At the end of the day, the custodians come in with foggers to kill any lingering virus. We have to exit our classrooms right after the students leave, so no more long afternoons at my desk catching up on grading. When I come home, I leave my shoes outside, change and shower immediately. Clothes go straight into the washer. Meanwhile, a large part of the general public tells us teachers to quit whining, that grocery clerks and medical personnel and other frontline workers have been working since March. Suck it up. I'm in my classroom from 9:05 to 2:15 with kids, with no personal break. None. I'm eating breakfast and lunch with them. First block is my planning block, so after breakfast, have 90 minutes to take care of things prepping for the day. Cleaning, sanitizing, worrying. Did I miss something? I'm already exhausted, and I can't imagine how my kids feel. And if that's not enough for anyone's plate, here in Louisiana, we have 2 hurricanes rolling in this week. 2 in the same week. I mean, really, stop already. I'm not having a pity party, I promise. I love my job. I love my school and my students. But I worry. This is not normal school. If parents thought that that's what they were getting, it's just not. Basically, they are getting virtual school in person, and they may or may not be notified if there's an exposure to their child's school. Even with all that, the kids do seem really happy to be back. And I'll do everything in my power to keep it that way. And that's from Pat Austin at my site. And I got to tell you, it's one of the best pieces that's been on my site in a while. I love this piece. It talks about a real issue. It talks about something that matters. And it gives you a real life example of how it works practically. It's reality. Reality is not a soundbite. Reality is not a quip. Reality is and has to be dealt with. Pat's dealing with it as best she can. And I'm sure there are going to be a lot of good teachers who are going to try and do the same. And I wish them the best of luck, whether the schools come back or whether they don't or whatever happens. I wish them the best of luck because they're going to need it. I know at my own work, they're actually getting cracking down more on social distancing and so forth. And in fact, it's hard at lunchtime now. We're instructed that as soon as we're done eating, the mask has to go back on, even if we're sitting down and having our lunch. So what I have now is a full bag of chips, and I'm just continually having chips and maybe a little chocolate, which isn't going to do much for my girlish figure, I'll tell you that. But this is a reality that we're going to have to deal with. Been a lousy year, 2020, which is funny because in some respects, it's been a very good year for mine. But, we're going to do the best we can. And I'm sure Pat will continue to do the best she can. I'm very proud of her, and I'm proud to have her writing on the site. I wish I had Juliet writing on the site, which reminds me, I forgot to mention Juliet's temporary replacement, Brian of the North, is now writing regularly on the site. So keep an eye out for his posts. I believe he's scheduled for Friday nights. So keep an eye out Friday nights for Brian. He's also from California, so he has the same restrictions as Juliet. Maybe after the first of the year, if the bill isn't repealed, I'll have them alternate a bit. That way we can have them both full years or whatever. I got to do something. I don't like not having Juliet write for me. I mean, yeah, I'm saving a few bucks, but I miss Juliet's writing. I really do. And I can't wait to get her back. Well, that's all the time I got today. I've got some tidying up I have to do. A few errands I have to run. Oh, she's just sent me a sad face. So I'm going to ask you guys favors. I had a little bit of good news. The laptop that we're on here, the new one I bought, it didn't show up on the credit card statement till next month, which means that didn't have to carry a balance. We'll make enough to pay for the laptop next month. Should be all right. But if you want to help out, the best way you can help this site out. Remember, we do this for two reasons: extra traffic on the site and about 180 more a month is what we're looking for. Now, if you're a regular watcher, you've probably already kicked in. If you can, just share the podcast. You can warn them that I actually said the N-word aloud if you want, because I don't play this N-word business when I'm talking about but not when I'm quoting. You use words mean things, and you want to use the words that were used when you're quoting someone, especially. Don't you think you can convey meaning? And I also think that it reflects weakness in the sense that you're pretending that people cannot cope. And one of the things I remember George Bush used to talk about, the soft bigotry of low expectations. I think we've actually seen that. And this is a point I was going to talk about this week, but I didn't have time, is that one of the reasons why I think the left excuses the violence is that they actually believe this. And this is, I swear to God, the left must believe this. I think the left actually believes that blacks are inferior, that they are not to be expected to do better. We keep hearing from Donna Brazil, 400 years of slavery. Forget the fact that the United States hasn't been around for all that long. For some reason, the left does not believe in the black community enough to say the black community is not going to riot. The black community cannot do things, cannot achieve. I'm back to reading my books. I'm in the 5th volume about that history. And there's so much optimism. They have optimism about the black community, optimism about Italian immigrants, optimism. It's optimism. And I look at the left and I look at the way they look at the black community. And I don't understand it. I mean, I look at my next door neighbor. I have a new next door neighbor. Black woman, 3 kids. Nice lady. She put a Black Lives Matter sign in front of the house. But, it's her house. But do I think she seems like a very nice lady? Works hard supporting her kids. Kids seem very nice. I remember when the young son was on a bike. Is he making a noise? No, he's outside. Let him play. Let the kid play and enjoy life. That's what being a kid is all about, for God's sakes. Very, very nice people. Why would you act like such people are inferior? Why would you expect less? People rise as a general rule, people rise to the expectations you have of them. That's what I found. If you have a high expectation for people, they will rise to it. If they have any initiative at all. Now, there's some people who don't have initiative. You can't change people. I mean, but it's not racial. I'm thoroughly convinced, and again, I've been reading these old history books written. The last book was written in 1929, and the commentary. And there's a lot of talk about white supremacy in those books. And you look at them and you say some of these people, because remember, this is history told by contemporaries, so you're hearing different people's arguments of the time. And it occurs to me that they're confusing race with culture. That Western civilization is a system. And in most ways, it's superior. Not in all ways. Some ways have other advantages. Some people may like one advantage more than another. For example, just to take New York City, for example, if you live in New York City before all this craziness took place, you had access to the arts. You probably didn't need a car if you didn't want one. You had people all around you. That's an advantage. If you like those things, that's an advantage. If you lived in a suburb, that's an advantage. In fact, one of the funny things about the books, they were talking about the rise of the automobile and how it meant that people could live outside the city a whole 8 or 9 miles maybe and still do work. And it's like what we have now, remote stuff. I don't have to be in a studio to do this with you. I don't have to pay money for a studio, which is great because that means I can afford to do it. But anyways, I'm getting on. This should be a whole new show that I'm going to, but I've gone longer than I should have. But I want to thank you. For those of you who've stuck with me, thank you for being here. Share the podcast. Tell your friends, tell your enemies, send them out. Maybe one of them will get me banned because I didn't play the N-word game when quoting somebody today, but that's all right. Let them do it because I have a life outside of YouTube. I have a life outside of Twitter. And the reality is if I get kicked off tomorrow, I'll still have that life, and I have a good wife. I have good sons. What more does a man need? I mean, I like you guys. Don't get me wrong. I like you guys. I like spending the time with you. But real life, and this is just some Catholic advice, real life are the people around you, your neighbors, the people you work with, the people you see in the store. I mean, it's one thing for me to talk about all these things that are going on in the country, and they're important things. But the guy down the street, the person who's living next to you is important because that's next door to you. The things that's going on in your supermarket are important because that's your market, your city. Keep that in mind, and you won't lose perspective on what counts. Thanks again. Take care. I will see you next week. You have a great rest of the day. Bye, all.
Oh, honey.